So, a while back, I was invited to the wedding of an old friend of mine who used to be a silicon design engineer for advanced micro devices, or AMD for short. I wanted to make something personalized for his wedding, and given that, he was a silicon design engineer, what better gift than a chunk of silicon? But not an ordinary chunk of silicon. Silicon with very, very small, and if it'll let me zoom in, intricate designs. So these designs, or what you see on this board, ultimately makes its way into the silicon chips found in a lot of, computers or laptops or mobile phones or even some smart fridges. So the point of this video is to essentially show how I went about designing this gift, the tools I used, I guess you could call it research process, and ideally, if you wanted to replicate this, how could you go about creating your own personalized gift? Oh, and yeah, of course, the other iterations that preceded it as well. So first off, we need to actually get a silicon wafer. There's a couple different places you can buy these wafers, but most commonly you'll find them coming and going on eBay. Uh, I personally bought what I believe is a 5-inch disc, but you can get them as large as 12 if you wanted to. Although I caution buying larger discs because of how fragile they are, and larger objects cost more and are more prone to mishaps due to accidental handling errors. But in any sense, yeah, you can buy one of these or even a set of 5 for around 100 US dollars, and if it's a smaller disc size, and it's not too unreasonable. Now, my friend in particular used to work for AMD, and as a result, I tried to find wafers that were meant for the 7 nanometer MOSFET technology node, but unfortunately, the only ones I could find were 12 nanometers that were also from AMD. Nonetheless, I don't think this visual or this technological difference is going to necessarily translate into a noticeable visual difference. So on that note, I bought a set of 5 of them from eBay. Unfortunately, the listing is no longer active, but as I mentioned, you can simply go on eBay and find whatever wafers look the nicest to you. It's purely subjective because, I doubt you're going to be using these in any kind of CPUs. So, next thing we need to do is actually design a stand. Given that there's upwards of 7 billion people on the human planet, or on the planet, chances are one or more of them had the idea to do something similar like this in the past. And when in doubt, you can always go on Thingiverse and take a look at, some existing designs. So this author, back in 2016, Te Millhouse, designed a very appealing stand for a 76 millimeter diameter silicon wafer. Now, the wafers I had were not the same size, and furthermore, I also wanted something personalized, like a little piece of text. So what I did instead was I simply downloaded this design and rescaled it to match the diameter of my silicon wafers, and then modified it slightly in Autodesk to add, a nice little plaque around here. But as you can see, the author did quite an amazing job in terms of the design. Even I really appreciate this little silicon crystal architecture. So yeah, and as you can actually see, he got the silicon wafer as well from eBay. Now that we've got this, we can load it into any kind of CAD software. In this case, I opted for Autodesk Fusion 360. After rescaling it, I remeshed, the mesh, just to give some nicer, clear polygons. And this is what we have. Now, ideally, I wanted a nameplate somewhere around this area, and this is kind of what you can see. I opted for a nice blank silicon or blank nameplate. You can also round the edges. Personally, I find rounded edges are generally easier to print with a 3D printer in that, well, rounded edges just appear more rounded, whereas sharp edges never really turn out the way you expect. Usually there's a bit of blobbing on the corners. The other issue is sharp edges, if unsupported, are more likely to fail during a print, whereas rounded ones, it's just generally easier to print. Anyways, now that we have a plaque, we can add, whatever text we want. In Autodesk, you have the ability to add your own text. I believe it would be under, when you create a new sketch, or you might not even need to create a new sketch. No, you do need to create a new sketch. So yeah, you can create text. There's a wide variety of different font sizes. I like this kind of italicized font, but any font generally will do. Just, again, avoid any sharp corners or fonts that have very thin lettering, because, the resolution of the printer, at least laterally, is about 0.4 millimeters. So, it's a cheap $300 Ender 3 with some modifications to it. It's not going to print outstanding quality products. But working with what I had on hand, this seems to be a reasonable size. And then we finally combine the two together, and we'll get something like this. Ignore the change in color. I was just trying to render some different materials. But yeah, you can see it seems pretty nice. And of course, in rendered software, it'll have a amazing gloss, which when you 3D print is almost entirely lost. But you do have a bit of interesting patterns in terms of the way light scatters when you look at 3D printed objects, given that they have layer lines that are fairly small. So now that we're all set on our design, and also I can make this file available on request if you guys wanted, but I don't know how much of a demand there is for something as specialized as this. Anyways, now that we have our design, the next thing is to actually set up the print. So when we load it in Decura or whatever print software you intend on using, you can slice it with a 0.2 nanometer resolution. Personally, or not nanometer, millimeter resolution. Personally, I usually try/test stuff out using 0.2 nanometers, but then for the final product, I usually opt for something lower, like 0.1. Now, of course, it'll take longer to print, but generally the amount of plastic used will remain more or less the same. And at the end of the day, unless you have a huge backlog of stuff you wanted to print, a print that takes 8 hours or a print that takes 16 or 13 or whatever, however many hours, it's not going to make a big difference. And you do have a nice higher resolution. Like, as you can see, the steps over here are a little bit more frequent. And, at the end of this video, I'll show some examples of the finished product, but it's much more noticeable, the kind of shiny gloss effect from the very, very, very small layer lines, as you can see here. So on that note, unless I'm missing anything, yeah, I guess we'll call it a day for now. And then I'll quickly show off just some examples of the finished product with one silicon wafer that I might give. I still haven't decided which of the 5 looks best, so I'm also open to feedback. I was also thinking of painting this text over with, a nice kind of black color, so similar, or sorry, gold color, just to give a little bit more contrast in, well, the actual text with the nameplate itself. Only challenge here is it's a manual step. I mean, if I have to go in with acrylic paint, I'm very prone to making a human error. Any slight human motion that might perturb the setting of this acrylic paint can make it look, relatively poor quality. So I'm still thinking of a good way to actually add gold lettering without me having to, use a very, very fine brush and carefully paint over the lettering. But if it should come to that, it's
Understandable. Anyways, let's take a look at some of the finished product.
So this is the final product, or at least my current version of the final product. I don't really intend to make any big changes to it. Um, but yeah, you can see that, you have a nice silicon wafer. Um, Probably shouldn't be touching it with my bare hands, but you have a little bit of play. I mean, I don't want it to be too tight that if you nudge it, you accidentally will just break a chunk off. But at the same time, I still want it to be able to, resist a little bit of shaking. Um, it's gonna drive me insane, so let me just, there we go. um, this is one of the 5 wafers that came with the order. Nothing really wrong with the wafers themselves. Honestly, they're great quality, very interesting designs, beautiful iridescence. Um, Now the actual print itself, the text isn't perfect. I mean, it's definitely legible, but as you can see, the I in Hussein kind of blobbed up a little, as well as some smaller pieces of text. Um, Again, not the end of the world, but going forward, I might have chosen or opted for a different font. Now, if we look at the crystals, they're pretty good. I mean, as long as you don't like zoom in super into like a corner or something. Um, if we take a look at the back, also very nice. And yeah, this is the kind of well, not iridescence, but reflectance, scattering of light. I don't know what the proper term here would be. Um, of having a 0.1 millimeter layer height. So it gives this nice kind of glossy finish, but at the same time, it's not glossy. It's really hard to describe because I haven't really seen this kind of texturing on any other materials, I mean, other than 3D printed parts. Um, in particular, I opted for a high gloss filament, so I believe it was Ultra Silk Black from One. They also have the gold version, which I previously or briefly showed. Um, but yeah, overall, I thought this was a fairly fun project. Um, I hope he enjoys it as well. And I mean, of course, his future wife-to-be is probably not going to be so excited just to get a simple chunk of silicon. So I'll also toss in like $100 Amazon gift card. Yeah. So, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to let me know. But this is more so meant to just be kind of a semi-informal, casual video on how to actually go about designing something like this, or either remixing existing designs, if you ever want to have, a nice little stand for a silicon wafer. So on that note, I wish you a wonderful Friday.